I still remember the exact moment the banquet hall fell silent. The sound of ice clinking against Malcolm Hayes's glass felt like a verdict. My mother Evelyn stood beneath the crystal chandelier with one hand pressed to her chest, as if she had just been deeply insulted. In front of her were more than 50 guests who had believed every story she had ever told about me. I walked toward the main table with a dark blue gift box in my hands. I had tied the silver ribbon myself the night before because, despite everything that had happened, I still wanted to give my mother one last chance. I thought that if there was even a trace of tenderness left in her, things might turn out differently. But I was wrong. "Well, look who finally showed up," my mother said with a laugh. Nora Whitman finally remembered she still has a mother. I placed the gift box on the table. "Happy anniversary to you and Malcolm." My mother did not touch it. She only tilted her head, her eyes moving over my simple black dress before stopping on my hand, resting on the lid of the box. "You still love putting on a show just like you did back then," she said. 10 years without calling home, and now you show up with a tiny box so everyone will think you are a devoted daughter." Malcolm set down his glass and stood up. He still had the look of a man who believed money gave him the right to crush anyone weaker than him. "Evelyn, do not waste your time," he said, then shoved the box hard toward me. "We do not need your cheap little gift. Take it and get out." The box hit my chest. I caught it with both hands. The entire room went still. A server froze beside a tray of champagne. Someone let out a quiet sigh. My mother looked at me and did nothing to stop him. Instead, she added a few more words, each one soft but sharp as a blade. "You have always been like this, Nora. A freeloader who thinks she can survive on other people's pity." I used to think those words would break me. But that night I did not cry. I did not scream. I only looked at her for a long moment, then let out a very quiet laugh. Malcolm frowned. "What are you laughing at?" I placed the box back in the center of the table and slowly untied the silver ribbon. "I was just thinking. I said that the two of you truly have no idea what you just rejected. If you have ever been looked down on by your own family, comment number 1. If you want to hear more stories where the truth finally returns to the person who deserves it, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next part." I opened the box. And to understand why that box could make my mother's entire life collapse in a single night, I have to tell you everything from the day my father walked out of our house and never came back. 12 years ago, before I understood that a room could become a prison for your youth, I used to have a real home. Back then, I was Nora Whitman, 16 years old, living with my parents in a small town in New Jersey, where every morning smelled of freshly cut grass and the sound of my father's car pulling out of the garage. My father, Daniel Whitman, was not rich. He was a construction engineer who often came home with dust on his shirt and calluses on his hands. But to me, he was richer than anyone I had ever known, because he always made time for his daughter. He remembered my school performances, my exam days, even the little things I never thought he noticed. Every evening, if he was not working late, he would sit with me at the kitchen table. He listened as I talked about school, then always ended with the same familiar sentence. "Nora, you have to think beyond this house. The world is big. I want you to walk into it on your own 2 feet." I used to think he said that because all fathers liked giving advice. It was only much later that I understood he might have seen the cracks in our family long before I did. That morning, the sky was strangely clear. My father pulled a small suitcase to the door, getting ready to head north to inspect a construction site. Before leaving, he bent down and kissed my forehead. The scent of black coffee and his shaving cologne is still clear in my memory, so clear that years later, whenever I smelled something similar, my heart would still tighten. "When I get back, we will go visit the college you like," he said. "Start dreaming big, little girl." I smiled. My mother Evelyn stood behind the kitchen counter, her eyes fixed on her phone. She only said quickly, "Drive safely." My father looked at her for one more second. Then he turned away. That was the last time I ever saw him alive. That afternoon, the phone rang while I was doing homework. My mother answered. At first, her voice sounded normal. Then her face turned pale, and one hand gripped the edge of the table. I asked what had happened, but she did not answer. She only looked at me as if she were looking at a responsibility that had suddenly become too heavy. The accident happened on the highway. A truck driver had fallen asleep and the truck crossed into the opposite lane. The police officer said my father died very quickly, almost without pain. Adults always think that sentence is comforting. To me, it only meant the world had taken away the one person who made me feel chosen. The funeral took place beneath a pale gray sky. I sat in the front row clutching my father's handkerchief. My mother accepted every hug with a strange calmness. I thought she was trying to be strong for me. I believed that, but that was not what hurt me the most. 2 weeks after the funeral, my mother started packing the first cardboard boxes. I thought she was only clearing things out to make the house feel less cold. But then I saw my father's engineering books, his toolbox, and the jacket he always wore in the fall, all being shoved into boxes as if they no longer had any value. I asked if I could keep my father's old watch. My mother did not look at me. She only said softly, "Stop clinging to the past, Nora. We have to start over." At the time, I did not understand what starting over truly meant when it came from my mother's mouth. I only knew that every time I mentioned my father, her face hardened. One night, as I passed by the living room, I heard my mother talking on the phone. Her voice was low, but she could not hide the excitement in it. The insurance money came through. Finally, I can escape my old life. I stood behind the wall, cold all the way down to my bones. What was her old life? Was it my father? Was it this house? Or was it me? 18 months later, the answer was right in front of me on a winter afternoon when my mother took me to Malcolm Hayes' house in Cedar Grove. It was a colonial-style home with a flat lawn, 2 large garages, and a clean white fence. My mother wore a cream-colored dress with a new ring on her hand. She said she and Malcolm had gotten married at the courthouse the week before. We did not want to make a big deal out of it, she explained. It was just a formality. I looked at her, waiting for an apology for not telling me, for not asking me. But she had already turned to fix Malcolm's collar as if I were nothing more than a suitcase she had brought along. Malcolm had a son named Brandon, a few years older than me. He took the largest guest room on the 2nd floor with his own bathroom and a window overlooking the backyard. His room already had a large bed, a desk, a television, and a brand new bookshelf. I was led to a room at the end of the hallway, one that had once been used for old storage. A small window sat high near the ceiling, the walls smelled damp, and the floor still carried the marks of boxes that had just been dragged away. "You can stay here," my mother said. "Anyway, all you need is a place to sleep." I set my suitcase down and listened to the wheels, hit the old wooden floor. Her sentence sounded so light, almost ordinary, but it sank deep into my heart. Because for the first time I understood that I had not been brought into this house as a daughter. I had been placed there like something left over. Brandon got a new car to prepare for college. Malcolm said his son needed to look the part. My mother nodded and smiled with pride. And I every night lay in that tiny room, staring at the water stain spreading across the ceiling, wondering if my mother still remembered that she had once had another family. And then things went much further than I ever imagined. In my final year of high school, I began applying to colleges with a very small kind of hope. I did not dare to dream of places that were too expensive or too far beyond reach. I only chose schools with strong interior design programs, partial scholarships, and locations close enough that if everything became too hard, I could still survive by working a few part-time jobs. When the first acceptance letter arrived, I sat for a long time outside my tiny room. My name was printed on the paper Nora Whitman, along with the notice of a scholarship. I read it again and again until the edges of the paper began to curl. For the first time in months, I wanted to run down to the kitchen, show my mother, and believe she would hug me and say my father would have been proud. But my mother only looked at the letter for a few seconds before placing it on the table. "How much is still missing?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "About $8,000 a year. I can work part-time. I just need you to help me with part of it at the beginning." Malcolm was sitting nearby reading the newspaper. He did not look up right away, but I knew he was listening. My mother sighed as if I had just placed another burden on her shoulders. "Nora, you have to understand our current situation. This family has many responsibilities." I looked at her. "What about Dad's insurance money?" The air in the kitchen changed instantly. My mother's hand froze on her teacup. Malcolm folded the newspaper and slowly set it down. "Who told you about that money?" my mother asked. "I just want to know. Dad is gone, but I am still his daughter. If any part of it could help me go to college—" "That is enough," Malcolm interrupted. His voice was not loud, but it was full of control. "That money was used to rebuild this family. Brandon needs support for school, for his car, for his future. And you are almost 18 now. If you want a degree, earn your own scholarship. That is how the real world works." I turned to my mother, waiting for her to object. Just one sentence. I only needed her to say that I was her child too, that my future was also worth investing in. But she only looked away. "Nora," she said, "Malcolm is right. You need to learn how to be independent." Independent. That was what they called abandonment when they wanted it to sound kinder. They turned the act of taking away my last support into a lesson about growing up. That night, I heard Brandon laughing loudly in the living room because Malcolm had just agreed to trade his car for a newer one. My mother said it would help Brandon make a good impression at school. Meanwhile, I sat in the room that had once been used for storage, holding my acceptance letter on my lap, wondering why my dream was treated like such an inconvenience. 3 days later, Malcolm stood in front of my bedroom door and said it plainly. "After your 18th birthday, you are leaving this house. I am not supporting a freeloader." I looked past his shoulder. My mother was standing at the end of the hallway, silent. And it was that silence that taught me the most painful lesson. Sometimes the person who hurts you the deepest is not the one who says the cruel thing, but the one who could have stopped it and chose to turn away. I thought I had only 3 weeks left to arrange a life that had not even had the chance to begin. During the day, I went to school as if everything were normal. I still turned in my assignments on time. I still smiled when teachers asked about graduation. But whenever the final bell rang, my heart sank because I knew I had to return to a house where no one truly wanted to see me exist. I worked part-time at a bakery near the bus station. Every night after wiping tables, washing trays, and collecting a few old pastries, the owner let me take home. I would open my notebook and calculate everything. My tiny wages, the partial scholarship, the remaining tuition, rent, food, books. The numbers were not on my side. Sometimes I wondered if I should give up. Maybe I could rent a cheap room, put my college dream away in a corner, and live the way everyone seemed to expect me to live. Make myself smaller. Stay quiet. Stop asking for too much. But every time that thought appeared, I remembered my father's voice. "Start dreaming, big little girl." That night, I lay in the cramped room, staring at the water stain on the ceiling as if it were a trapped sky. My phone vibrated on the small table beside my bed. The screen showed an unfamiliar number from Boston. Back then, even an unknown call was enough to frighten me. But I answered anyway. "Is this Nora?" a woman's voice asked, warm but very careful. "This is Margaret Whitman. I am your father's sister." I sat up immediately. That name felt like a candle being lit in a dark room. I vaguely remembered Aunt Margaret from the funeral, a woman with eyes, like my father's, someone who had tried to hug me before my mother quickly pulled me away. "How did you get my number?" I asked. "I have been looking for a long time," she said. Your mother did not want your father's family contacting you. But I think it is time you knew something. Your father left something for you. My heart pounded so hard that the hand holding the phone began to shake. What is it? A box, Aunt Margaret said softly. And a promise I have kept for your father all these years. After being deceived by my own mother so many times, I had learned to distrust even gentle things. But there was something in my aunt's voice that reminded me of my father, a kind of love that did not need to perform for anyone. That weekend, I told my mother I was going to a classmate's house to prepare for final exams. Early in the morning, I hid a few bills in my pocket and stepped onto a bus headed for Boston. I did not know whether salvation or another heartbreak was waiting for me at the end of that trip. I only knew that for the first time in a long while I had somewhere to go besides the house that was trying to push me out the door. The trip to Boston took almost 6 hours. I sat by the window, clutching my old backpack to my chest, watching the rows of houses fall behind me as if my old life were shrinking with every mile. Along the way, I almost got off at the next stop and went back more than once. Not because I wanted to return to that tiny room, but because I was afraid of hope. A person who is used to being abandoned becomes terrified when someone says they are holding something good for them. Aunt Margaret was waiting for me at the bus station, wearing a gray coat and holding a dark blue wool scarf. The moment I saw her, my throat tightened. Her eyes looked so much like my father's that I had to turn away to keep myself from crying. She held me for a long time, as if she had wanted to do that since the day of the funeral, but had been stopped by the whole world. Her apartment was small on the 3rd floor of an old building, but it felt strangely warm. The walls were covered with photos of my father when he was young. There was one of him in his graduation gown, another of him standing beside a crooked Christmas tree, smiling brightly. It turned out my mother had not only thrown away my father's things, she had also thrown away a whole part of my memory that I should have had the right to keep. Aunt Margaret placed a small wooden box in front of me. It was dark brown with old brass hinges. Your father gave me this box years ago, she said. Daniel made me promise to give it to you, only when you truly needed it. I looked at the box, my heart heavy in my chest. Did Dad know something would happen? Your father did not know he would die young, she said. But he knew Evelyn was not someone who would always put you first. I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a savings account book in my name and a yellowed envelope. The money in the account was enough to cover the tuition gap I had thought would swallow my future whole. But what broke me was not the number. It was my father's handwriting. My beloved daughter, if you are reading these words, it means I am no longer there to protect you. But I want you to know one thing. When other people do not choose you, it never means you are not worthy of being chosen. I kept reading through my tears. My father said the money was mine for my education, for my life, for me to go farther than the fear other people had placed on my shoulders. At the end of the letter, he wrote only one short sentence. I have always believed in you. I collapsed over the table and cried like a child. After so many days of being called a burden, I finally heard someone say that I deserved a future. If you believe that just one person truly believing in you can save an entire life, comment the word believe. And if this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to keep hearing emotional family stories like this one. When I left Aunt Margaret's apartment, I was no longer the girl who had nothing. I carried my father's money, my father's letter, and a quiet truth burning in my chest. I had not been left behind. I had been prepared to move forward. I returned to Cedar Grove on Sunday afternoon as sunlight slanted across the white fence in front of Malcolm's house. In my backpack were copies of the account documents, Aunt Margaret's address, and my father's letter folded inside a new envelope. I knew I could not reveal everything yet. Not because I was afraid, but because some truths had to be saved for the right moment. My mother was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. She did not ask if I was tired. She only looked at the backpack on my shoulder and asked coldly, "Where did you really go?" I set the backpack down on a chair. I went to Boston. I met Aunt Margaret. My mother's face changed very quickly, as if I had just opened a door she had spent years trying to keep locked. I told you that family has nothing to do with us anymore. No, I replied. They still have something to do with me. They are my father's family. Malcolm appeared in the doorway holding a glass of liquor. If you live under my roof, you follow my rules. And the rule here is that you do not associate with people who like interfering in other people's family matters. For the first time, I no longer felt small in front of that voice. In my pocket, I had proof that my father had never abandoned me. And I understood that Malcolm only felt powerful when other people needed him. Then you will not have to worry for much longer, I said. After graduation, I am leaving. My mother tightened her hand against the table. Nora, do not act like you are the victim. We gave you a place to live. No, I said quietly. You gave me a storage room and called it kindness. No one said anything after that. But from that day on, the house became even colder. My mother passed by me, as if she were passing by a mistake. Malcolm locked the liquor cabinet, the safe, even his office, as if I might steal anything other than the right to live with dignity. Brandon sneered every time he saw me carrying books. Graduation arrived on a bright June morning. I stood backstage watching families hold flowers, cameras, and balloons. When my name was called, I walked up to receive my diploma to the applause of strangers. The seat reserved for my mother was empty. Malcolm was not there either. Brandon was with them at a car dealership choosing his new car. I did not cry. I only smiled at the photographer, then shook my head when he asked if anyone wanted to take a photo with me. That afternoon, I pulled the 2 suitcases I had already packed out of the tiny room. Everything I owned fit inside them. Clothes, a few books, my father's letter, and a fragile belief that somewhere out there was still a place for me. Before leaving, I placed a note on the kitchen table. Thank you for teaching me where I should never beg for love. Then I called a taxi. When the door closed behind me, I did not look back. Some places are not home, no matter how long you once slept there. I arrived in New York late one evening when the city was glowing, as if it never knew how to get tired. Aunt Margaret helped me rent a small studio near campus, just big enough for a bed, a desk, and a few boxes. But to me, that room felt larger than anywhere I had ever lived, because for the first time the key was in my own hand. The first few months were not as beautiful as the stories people like to tell about overcoming hardship. I went to class during the day, worked as a server at a cafe until almost midnight, then came home with aching feet and the smell of coffee clinging to my hair. Some nights I ate old pastries the cafe owner let me take home chewing while reading my textbooks. Some mornings I woke up after less than 5 hours of sleep, looked at myself in the mirror and wondered if I was pushing myself too hard. But every time I wanted to give up, I opened my father's letter. His handwriting did not pay my rent or finish my assignments for me, but it kept me from falling into the hole my mother had dug inside me. My father believed in me. On some days, that belief alone was enough to make me stand up again. In my second year, I applied for an internship at a small interior design firm in Manhattan. My first job was not drawing renderings or meeting clients. I made coffee, organized fabric samples, dusted stone shelves, and took notes in meetings where no one remembered my name. But I listened to everything. I learned how light wall color and furniture could make a room feel less lonely. One late afternoon, my boss, Helen Price, looked at a sketch I had secretly made for a small apartment and fell silent. "Who taught you to see space like this?" she asked. I thought of my father. I thought of the storage room in Cedar Grove. I thought of every place that had ever made me feel like I did not belong. Maybe it was the places I never wanted to stay, I replied. Helen gave me my first project. From then on, I worked more, learned more, made more mistakes, and corrected more of them. Clients began to remember my name. One person recommended me to another, then another. I was still poor, I was still exhausted, but there was dignity inside that exhaustion. On the day I graduated from college, Aunt Margaret sat in the front row holding a bouquet of white flowers. When I stepped down from the stage, she hugged me and said my father must be proud. I cried not because I was sad, but because someone had finally shown up for me. After that, I took a job at a large design firm. For the next 3 years, I worked until I was nearly burned out. I learned how to negotiate, how to stand in front of wealthy clients without lowering my head, and how to say no when people wanted to undervalue my work. By the time I was 27, I opened my own studio, Nora Whitman Interiors. I did not show off my private life. I did not talk about my past. I did not give Evelyn or Malcolm any path into my new life. But my name began appearing in design magazines. The apartments I touched became warmer, brighter, and more livable. 10 years passed that way. I did not become strong overnight. I simply learned not to apologize for still being alive, still dreaming, and still succeeding. And just when I thought the past had finally agreed to stay buried, a cream-colored invitation appeared in my mailbox. The invitation was buried among a pile of advertising mail on a Thursday afternoon. I had just come back from a meeting with a client in Tribeca, my feet still aching from a new pair of heels, one hand holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. At first, I was going to throw everything into the recycling bin. But then I saw the return address, the Hayes Residence, Cedar Grove, New Jersey. I froze in front of my apartment door as if a hand had dragged me back to that cold hallway from years ago. 10 years. For 10 years, my mother had not called on my birthday, had not asked where I lived, had not asked whether I had enough to eat. Not one apology. And yet now her name appeared on a thick, cream-colored envelope, printed in silver lettering, that looked elegant and cold. Inside was an invitation to Evelyn and Malcolm Hayes' anniversary party at the Cedar Grove Club. I read it again and again, not because I was moved, but because I was trying to find some sign that this was an invitation from a mother who missed her daughter. There was none. Every sentence sounded more like a social announcement than a bridge back to blood. That night I called Aunt Margaret. She answered quickly as if she was always ready in case the past scratched at my wounds again. "Do you think I should go?" I asked. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. "I cannot decide that for you. But I have heard a few things. Malcolm's business is not doing well. They are slowly losing their position at the club. Evelyn is no longer as generous at fundraisers as she used to be." I looked at the invitation on the kitchen table. Everything suddenly became clearer. This was not love waking up late. This might be a calculation. A daughter who had been smeared for years, if she suddenly returned, could help my mother play the role of a forgiving parent. Or worse, if she knew I had succeeded, I could become her new lifeline. "So my mother does not miss me," I said. "Aunt Margaret Sile. Maybe she misses what you might be able to give her." That sentence hurt, but it did not break me. I had outgrown the age where I destroyed myself over a mother who did not know how to love properly. I placed the invitation on the table and looked out the window. The city below was still bright, still noisy, still mine, in a way the house in Cedar Grove had never been. "I will go," I said. "Nora." "Not to beg for a family back," I interrupted gently. "I am going to see with my own eyes how far she can still lie." After hanging up, I stood in the quiet kitchen. There are doors you close, but sometimes you still have to return once just to make sure there is nothing left inside worth saving. And this time I would not go empty-handed. It took me 3 days to decide what I would bring to that party. Part of me wanted to arrive empty-handed to simply stand in front of my mother and let silence speak for the 10 years of abandonment. But another part of me, the softer and more wounded part, still wanted to try one last time. I was no longer poor. That did not mean money had become weightless. Every dollar in my account carried the smell of sleepless nights, long serving shifts, design drafts revised until the paper nearly tore, and mornings when I walked onto construction sites with my eyes still burning from lack of sleep. So when I signed the papers to buy a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, my hands still trembled. It was not a luxurious apartment meant for showing off. It was in a building with a doorman good light, a safe neighborhood close to the park and the hospital. A place decent enough for a woman, if she truly wanted to start over without clinging to Malcolm or any other man. I thought of my mother when I chose it. I thought of the woman who had been so afraid of poverty that she stepped over her own child just to hold on to the feeling of safety. I had not forgiven her. But I wondered if I gave her a real way out, would she choose to be a mother properly, even once? Ethan Walker, the man I loved, sat across from me at the dining table while I wrapped the box. He was an architect, quiet, patient, and one of the few people who knew my entire story without ever using it to pity me. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. I smoothed the dark blue wrapping paper. "I am not sure. But I need to know." "Know what?" "Whether she truly wants her daughter back, or whether she only wants something from her daughter." Ethan looked at the silver key resting on the velvet. Beneath it were copies of the ownership documents folded with perfect care. He did not stop me. He only reached across the table and took my hand as if reminding me that I still had somewhere to return to if that night turned out worse than I imagined. Maybe love is like that. It does not drag someone away from their battle. It simply stands close enough that when they turn back, they know they are no longer alone. Before going to bed, I opened the drawer and took out a copy of my father's letter along with the documents related to the savings account he had once left for me. I placed them all inside my black clutch. I hoped I would not have to use them. But I had learned very early that hope was never enough to protect a woman walking into a room full of people who were used to turning her into a lie. The party took place at the Cedar Grove Club, the place my mother had once dreamed of entering with a new last name and a ring large enough to make people stare. The building glowed beneath golden lights, its glass doors reflecting a line of expensive cars waiting outside the entrance. I sat in the car for a few seconds before stepping out, one hand resting on the blue box in my lap, listening to my heart beat slow and heavy. Inside, everything had been arranged to look perfect. White tablecloths, cream roses, crystal glasses, and the soft sound of string music floating through the air like mist. My mother stood in the center of the room in a silver dress, a strand of pearls around her neck, her smile warm enough to make outsiders believe she was a happy woman. Then she saw me. That smile stopped for less than a second, but I saw it clearly. It was not the emotion of a mother seeing her daughter again after 10 years. It was the irritation of a hostess noticing a detail that was not in the script. She did not walk toward me. She only gave me a slight nod, the way someone might greet a familiar server. "Nora Whitman." The voice behind me made me turn around. Brandon Hayes stood there holding a glass of champagne, wearing an expensive suit, though his posture was still as lazy as ever. He looked me up and down, the corner of his mouth lifting. "I did not think you would actually come. I assumed you were busy, barely surviving somewhere." I held the gift box with both hands. "I was invited." "Right," Brandon said with a quiet laugh. "Evelyn is so kind after all. She always said you deserved another chance even though you never knew how to be grateful." I looked straight at him. "What did my mother say about me?" He shrugged, as if he were telling a perfectly ordinary story. "That you ran away, never finished school properly, could not keep a job, and always blamed everyone else. Basically a sad story. The kind of daughter who breaks her parents' hearts." I heard a few soft laughs from people standing nearby. A woman leaned toward her friend and whispered. A man glanced at the box in my hands, then looked away with pity. So in this room, I was not a guest. I was the villain in the story my mother had been telling for years. Brandon leaned closer. "Here is some advice. Do not embarrass Evelyn tonight. She has suffered enough because of you. What would you do? Would you turn around and leave or walk straight toward the truth? Comment 1 if you would face them. Comment 2 if you would leave." And do not forget to subscribe if you want to see how Nora opens that box. I looked over Brandon's shoulder and saw my mother sitting at the main table beside Malcolm. She was still smiling, still raising her glass, still playing the role of a beloved woman perfectly. I walked past Brandon. With every step I took toward that table, the whispers behind me grew clearer. But this time I was no longer the girl who had lived in that storage room years ago. I had not come to beg them to believe me. I had come to see what they would do when the truth was placed right in front of them. I stopped in front of the main table just as Malcolm was raising his glass with a group of older guests. My mother sat beside him, her back straight, her gentle smile hiding the coldness in her eyes when she saw me. On the table were cream-colored flowers, scented candles, and a tall anniversary cake with several tiers. Everything spoke of love. And I was the only one standing there with the feeling that I had just walked into a place where love was being performed. I placed the blue box in front of my mother. "Happy anniversary," I said. A woman to my mother's left leaned in slightly. "Evelyn, is this your daughter? She is beautiful." My mother laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Yes, Nora. She has always known how to appear at just the right moment to get attention." I stayed silent. I had promised myself I would not let her drag me down with that old tone. But my mother did not need me to react. She already had her stage prepared. "To be honest, I am surprised she came," she said louder. 10 years without asking how her mother was doing, and tonight she brings a gift. Maybe she finally remembered that family can still be useful. A few people laughed awkwardly. Someone looked at me with pity, but no one spoke. Later I understood that in elegant rooms, many people mistake silence for politeness. Malcolm set down his glass, his eyes moving over the box as if it were something cheap. "Where did you get the money to buy a gift?" he asked. "Or did you pick something up from a discount store again?" My mother pretended to stop him, but the corner of her mouth curved. "Malcolm, do not say that. Nora tries in her own way." In her own way. Pity wrapped in velvet. I looked at her. "Did you tell everyone how I have been living?" "Why should I hide it?" She tilted her head. "You ran away from home, cut off contact, had no stability, and did not know who to rely on." "I only told the truth." "No," I said softly. "You told the story that benefited you." Her smile disappeared. The room began to quiet down. The conversations around us faded one by one. Brandon stood near the bar with his arms crossed, watching, as if he were waiting for the best part of the entertainment. My mother pressed both hands against the table, her voice sharper now. "Do not come here and play the victim. I have suffered enough embarrassment because of you. Everyone knows you cannot take care of yourself." Malcolm stood up. His chair scraped across the floor with a dry sound. He picked up the box and shoved it hard toward me. The lid struck my hand. "Listen carefully," he said. "We do not need your cheap little gift. Take it and get out." I held the box against my chest. For one moment, I saw myself again at 18, standing in the hallway with 2 suitcases waiting for my mother to say one sentence that would make me stay. She had not said it. That night was no different. My mother only looked at me, then nodded. "Malcolm is right," she said coldly. "You are embarrassing yourself. A freeloader should not try to look generous." The entire room went silent. Everyone looked at me as if they were waiting to see how I would break. But I did not break. I placed the box back on the table and slowly smoothed the ribbon flat. "Well then," I said, "perhaps everyone should know what this cheap little gift really is." I untied the silver ribbon in a silence so heavy it almost felt suffocating. No one in that room was pretending to drink or talk anymore. Every eye was fixed on my hands on the blue box that Malcolm had called a cheap little gift only minutes earlier. My mother stood frozen. She was still trying to keep her chin lifted, but her eyes had begun to waver. Maybe she realized I was no longer the little girl from years ago, the one who would lower her head and apologize the moment she was scolded, even when she had done nothing wrong. I opened the lid. Inside, resting on dark blue velvet, was a silver key and a neatly folded stack of documents. The crystal lights fell across the key, making it shine like a small, sharp piece of truth. A woman sitting near my mother asked quietly, "What is that?" I picked up the key. "This is the key to a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side in Manhattan," I said. "A building with a doorman in a safe neighborhood close to the park, quiet enough for someone to start over." Whispers spread through the room very quickly. Brandon let out a dry laugh, as if he were hearing a terrible joke. "Are you putting on an act?" I took out the documents beneath the key and opened them in front of everyone. "And these are the ownership papers. The apartment has been fully paid for. No mortgage. No loan. It is worth about $450,000. This time, the whispers turned into a wave. Malcolm stared at the papers as if they had slapped his pride in the face. A few guests took out their phones. I heard fingers tapping on screens. I heard someone quietly reading my name. My mother spoke, her voice suddenly dry. "Where did you get that kind of money?" "From my work." "What work?" Brandon cut in. "What kind of important job could you possibly have?" I turned to him with a faint smile. "Nora Whitman Interiors. My interior design studio in Manhattan. You can look it up right now if you want." A strange silence followed. Then a woman behind me whispered that there really was a website. Someone else said they had seen an article in a design magazine. The color slowly drained from my mother's face. "I intended to give this apartment to you," I said, turning back to look directly at her. "Not because you deserved it from the beginning, but because I wanted to give you a chance, a place to live if one day you wanted to leave the lies, leave the fear of poverty, and leave the marriage you chose by sacrificing your own daughter." "Stop talking nonsense," Malcolm growled. "You have no right to speak to your mother like that." "You once said your house would not support a freeloader," I replied. "I heard you." "I left. And I built a place of my own. So why are you so upset now that I have something you cannot control?" A few guests turned to look at Malcolm. For the first time that night, he did not find an answer quickly enough. My mother took one step forward, her eyes fixed on the key. In her expression, I could clearly see the battle between greed and humiliation. She wanted to reject me, but she also wanted what was inside the box. She wanted to keep playing the role of the wounded mother, but she could not take her eyes off the apartment I had just placed in front of her. "Were you really going to give it to me?" she asked, her voice softening. I closed the box with a quiet click. I said, "Before you called me a freeloader in front of everyone here." My mother looked at the closed box, as if she were staring at a door that had just slammed shut in front of her. For a few seconds, she was no longer the elegant woman at the center of the party. She was only someone who had just realized she had lost something she thought she still had the right to take back. "Nora," she said, her voice softening very quickly. "You are just angry. I know you still love your mother." I had once wanted that sentence to be true. I had once wanted her to step forward, hold me, and tell me she had been wrong. But her eyes were not on my face. They kept flicking down to the box. "No," I said. "You do not want me. You want the key." Malcolm placed a hand on my mother's shoulder, as if reminding her to stay calm. But the party had already slipped out of their control. The people who had laughed along with my mother's words were now looking at her differently. With doubt. With discomfort. A silver-haired woman stepped out from the crowd. I recognized her from old photos of my father. Vivian Carter, Daniel Whitman's close friend. She turned to my mother. "Evelyn, you told us Nora left because she was reckless. You said the girl lived off other people." My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. I reached into my clutch and took out the envelope I had prepared. The paper was old, its edges softened from being opened too many times. Just seeing the handwriting on the outside made Vivian press a hand to her chest. "That is Daniel's handwriting," she whispered. I nodded. My father wrote this letter before he died. And perhaps tonight everyone should hear part of the truth. My mother hid. "Nora, do not," my mother blurted out. This time there was real fear in her voice. But I had lived for too long inside the story she created. I opened the letter. "My beloved daughter, if you are reading these words, it means I am no longer there to protect you. But I want you to remember this. When other people do not choose you, it never means you are not worthy of being chosen." The room was so silent that I could hear my own breathing. I continued reading more slowly this time. "I have set aside money for you. It belongs to you and to no one else. Use it to study, to live, and to walk away from any place that makes you feel small. I have always believed in you." I lowered the letter. Vivian's eyes were red. "Daniel left money for Nora," she asked. "But you told us the insurance money was almost gone because of the funeral." I looked at my mother. The insurance money was not gone because of the funeral. It was used for a new house, Brandon's new car, Brandon's education, and your new life. Meanwhile, I was put in a storage room and called a freeloader. Malcolm growled at me to shut up, but no one was listening to him anymore. The truth had moved through that room like a crack running across glass. If you believe family has no right to use blood ties to crush someone's dignity, comment number 1. If you still believe forgiveness is necessary even after betrayal, comment number 2. And if you want to hear the ending Nora chooses for that key, subscribe to the channel before we step into the final part. My mother began to cry. But for the first time, her tears could no longer control me. I left the Cedar Grove Club in the cold wind of early October. Behind me, the sound of people talking broke into layers of chaos, but for the first time, I did not turn around to guess what they were thinking. The glass door closed, reflecting my face back at me. I saw a tired woman with slightly red eyes, but no longer the little girl standing in a hallway, waiting for her mother to choose her. Ethan was waiting for me at the Manhattan apartment. He did not ask questions right away. He only opened the door, pulled me into his arms, and let me stand there in silence. Some nights people do not need advice. They only need a place safe enough for the heart to stop bracing itself. My phone kept lighting up. My mother called. Malcolm called. Brandon called. Messages appeared one after another, sometimes begging, sometimes blaming, sometimes pretending to be loving. My mother wrote that she had not meant it, that we were blood, and that I could not treat her like a stranger. I placed the phone face down on the table. "Are you going to answer?" Ethan asked. "Not tonight," I said. A week later, I answered once. My mother cried a lot. She said that after my father died, she had been terrified of having nothing, terrified of being left behind, terrified of becoming a woman with nothing to her name. I listened. But when she asked whether the apartment was still meant for her, everything inside me became quiet. "No, Mom," I said. "I can listen to you. I can let time prove whether you have truly changed. But I will not use money to buy back a mother's love that I should have received for free." The other end of the line went silent. Then my mother asked if I hated her. I looked out the window where the city was beginning to shine after the rain. "I do not want to hate you anymore," I replied. "But I will not let you hurt me again either." 6 months later, I gave that key to Aunt Margaret. She stood in the living room of the Upper West Side apartment, tears rolling down her cheeks. The woman who had kept her promise to my father finally had a place full of light. "Nora, I cannot accept this," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved me," I said. Not only with my father's money, but by reminding me that I had never been completely abandoned. She hugged me, and in that embrace, I understood that some families are not created by birth certificates. They are created by the people who stay when we have nothing left to trade. Life after that did not become a fairy tale. My mother still called once a month. The conversations were short, careful, and held within clear boundaries. Malcolm disappeared from my life like a door I never needed to open again. I did not check on Brandon or anyone else. I did not need to watch them fall apart to know that I had stayed standing. I kept working. My studio grew. Ethan proposed to me on an ordinary evening in our small kitchen with the smell of hot soup in the air. I said yes, not because he saved me, but because beside him I never had to beg to be loved. Sometimes I still write letters to the 16-year-old girl who once lay beneath a water-stained ceiling. I tell her that she will be okay. One day she will walk into a room full of people who once believed lies about her and leave with the truth in her hands. My father once wrote that he believed in me. Now finally I believe in myself,